there's an expression that often is used that the solution for pollution is dilution. And a lot of people and a lot of people don't particularly like that expression because it seems to give license to adding more contaminants to a stream. But in fact, it is the issue. I mean, when you look at water quality and you measure water quality, you're measuring it in terms of concentration. And if you have lower concentrations, you can often, it's not impactful. If you have higher concentrations, of course it is. And of course, you got to remember that those contaminants that sometimes that you're looking at, a lot of them are naturally in systems anyways. I mean, we naturally have nitrogen and phosphorus and metals in our waters. And so while we may think of them as contaminants, particularly when they impact uses within a certain stream, I don't know if contaminants is quite the right phrasing. But anyway, we all know that with lower flows, we're generally going to have higher concentrations. And so that's obviously the main issue affecting water quality is increasing those concentrations. And then, of course, when we have temperatures, that also is going to negatively impact water quality. There's not too many ways around it. There may be some places where lower flows may actually be beneficial. You may have less groundwater moving through mine workings, for example, carrying less metals out of those mines, so you might actually get less metal loading. But I think those are pretty far and few between. I think for the most part, what we're going to see is that as we have higher temperatures and we have less water, water quality problems are just going to become more challenging. So what I thought I'd do today is take advantage of some of this time and give you a little bit of an update on what's going on up in the upper Animas Basin, 50 miles north of here around the Silverton area, where there's a Superfund site now since the Gold King spill. There's a lot of resources being thrown into that Superfund site, and I think in general people around Southwest don't have very much of a perspective as to actually what's going on up there. And so I thought it'd be a good summary for me to talk about that today. So the upper Animas Basin, there's been a lot of work up there for a lot of years. The first kind of really strong efforts to try to address water quality issues and issues related to mining up in Silverton started 30 years ago. And there's been a lot of data collected. There's been a lot of work that's been done in the upper Animas Basin. Before the Superfund designation, there were approximately 60 mine remediation projects that were completed up there. Those were all done by the Animas River Stakeholders Group or the partners to Animas River Stakeholders Group, including mining companies and land management agencies. At a certain point, the Animas River Stakeholders Group kind of ran out of the ability to do more projects, and those were the ability where they ran into a limitation was liability issues with draining mines and with cost, because a lot of these projects got to the point where what needed to be done was going to be very, very expensive and couldn't occur. Unfortunately, we had the Gold King mine spill in 2015. I'm sure most of you recognize that picture. It's kind of a famous picture now, taken by Jerry McBride. And as a result of this, there was a big, big push by EPA to try to designate the upper Animas Basin as a Superfund site. EPA had been interested in designating the upper Animas for probably 25, 30 years as a Superfund site, but this really kind of gave them the impetus to kind of make lemonade out of lemons after that spill. So the site was designated in 2016. It consists of 46 mine sites and 2 study areas. And kind of the interesting aspect of it is there's no set boundaries to the Superfund site. They could add more sites. There is no boundaries around the particular mine sites. So if you have claims around there, you're not sure if you're in or out. If they found sources downstream, say sources of sediment around Durango or Farmington, theoretically, you could extend the Superfund site down here or down into New Mexico. I don't think that's likely. But just it's kind of amorphous. It's kind of a little hard to understand kind of what's in, what's out, and what's going to go on next. There are 3 site goals for the site that EPA has designated. One is improve water quality. That's kind of the biggest goal. The second one is to stabilize source areas, and what that really means is they're trying to keep mine sites from mine debris from washing into the stream with a heavy flood or a heavy rain or something along those lines. The stabilized source sites is kind of what I would think is kind of maintenance stuff, diverting mine drainage off of dump piles, pulling mine waste out of the streams, mucking out ponds out in front of streams, or out front of draining mines. Then the third goal is to minimize unplanned releases, which is of course what the Gold King mine spill was about. Expenditures so far, there's been a lot of money spent up there. So there was EPA spent approximately $30 million responding to the Gold King spill. A lot of that was all the sampling they did here. A lot of it was all the public outreach. Part of it was stabilizing the front end of the Gold King mine itself and stabilizing the waste rock pile, because a lot of that was eroded and carried away during the spill. And they also built a treatment plant up there. But they spent $30 million in that first year. And then since that time, they've spent approximately $70 million since 2016 at that Superfund site. We don't know the exact figure. EPA won't tell us what the exact figure is because they don't want to give a figure, because there's often the possibility of cost recovery and litigation. And they don't want to publicly say, this is how much we spent, and then have to defend that later in court. They want to be able, they're not going to do that until they have their numbers kind of gone through a process with a number of accountants. So they won't tell you how much they've actually spent. Sunnyside Gold, which is the only kind of major mining company up there, they've spent about $14 million since the Superfund designation, mostly characterizing the Mayflower tailings, which were all reclamated about 30 years ago, but there's potential for them to be contributing metals down to the Animas. Those tailings piles are just upstream on the Animas side of Silverton. So they've drilled a lot of wells all around there, done a lot of sampling, and done some other types of geophysical work trying to study those mine tailings piles. And then there's also been smaller amounts by land management agencies and other property owners. That's a map of the site. So Silverton's kind of right there in the middle. Those 4 segments that have numbers and are colored, those are the target areas to improve water quality. There are fish populations in those particular areas. The number 1 area, priority area, is down below Silverton. You can see there, kind of below Elk Park. Number 2 areas over there, kind of going up towards Howardsville and Eureka. The 3rd area is the South Fork of Minnow Creek, and then the 4th is part of the Minnow Creek up right below Red Mountain Pass. Activities since the designation, there's a treatment plant of the Gold King mine discharge that's been ongoing the whole time. It's probably cost $2 to $3 million a year. They've been designing a permanent repository which will sit on top of tailings pond number 4. That's one of the last really big flat areas that they can put something up in San Juan County. It's probably about 35 acres on top of that mine tailings pile. An enormous amount of data has been collected. They've done some investigative well drilling, drilling down into some of the mine workings, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Some source stabilization. But I think the most important thing is they have done nothing that significantly improves water quality other than treat the Gold King mine during this whole time with all that money. Why is that? Well, it's because of the Superfund process. Superfund is designed to support litigation for cost recovery. And as a result, they are building everything they collect, all the data they collect, how they process the data, how they go about things, all has to stand up in court. And this is a process that they developed over the past probably 30 or 40 years, about 40 years since the Superfund was created. And as a result, they spend enormous amounts of money. Also, the contractors are kind of international contractors that charge a lot of money, that are kind of been approved by EPA to be able to do this kind of work. And they spend a lot of money in terms of process. The other part of this, of course, is the reason they're doing so much, they're supporting litigation, is that EPA, when they designate a Superfund site, you can come in and charge that Superfund site, charge a particular party there for all the costs of what's going on at that site, and try to recover all that money from them. And those people are called PRPs. Deep-pocketed PRPs can be targeted for all that particular money, and even if they only contribute a small amount to the damages. And PRPs can sue one another to try to recover costs. There has been one settlement that just occurred in January, a draft settlement. It's now been out for public comment, which has ended. We don't know yet if the court will approve it. It's a payment of $90 million, half of it by Sunnyside Gold and half of it by the U.S. government. And what that means is that basically says that there's equal liability between the U.S. government and the mining company. The reason that the agencies are PRPs is because BLM and Forest Service actually own some of these mine sites. They're on their property. EPA is a PRP because of the Gold King spill. And it's, to my knowledge, this is the first time ever EPA has been a PRP at a Superfund site. And that's really something new and different for them. In exchange, there will be no lawsuits if this settlement goes through. And hopefully people will start being willing to talk to one another. Right now, agencies like BLM and Forest Service are collecting data information, but they're not sharing it with anybody because they're concerned about litigation. A little bit about our community advisory group. We're an officially recognized advisory group, 15 members, some of it appointed by local government entities. And some of the things we do, we have monthly meetings, we maintain a website. If you type in Bonita Peak CAG, you'll find us. We sample monthly between Silverton and Baker's Bridge. We hike down into the basin and ski in down the railroad tracks when we can, when the snow isn't too deep, to get samples. And we've also proposed water quality standards on that one particular segment, segment 4. The reason for that is that water quality has improved dramatically in Mineral Creek because of all the projects done pre-Superfund. Zinc and cadmium concentrations have dropped by 72%. Copper concentrations have dropped by 95%. And much to the surprise of everyone, fish were found there in 2015, 2016. And so the idea behind the standards proposal that the CAG's proposing is to put an aquatic life use on that segment and put appropriate standards to protect those fish. The other part of it is we're trying to push EPA to start thinking about long-term goals. What's the end point to this Superfund site? It's going to be water quality standards, and we want to drive them in that direction and start getting them to think about it. So that was a big part of doing this particular proposal. I think with that, I'm going to end my talk and pass this on over to John.